All right, we're live on KEXP at home. I'm proud to present the weather station. I'm talking to Tamara Lindeman from the weather station right now. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We're talking to you not long after the release of your fantastic record, Ignorance. That record kind of represents a big change sound-wise for you. What kind of sparked that?
So many things. I mean, I think like good and bad things. You know, on the one hand, it was just a vision kind of came to mind of a sonic palette that would fit what the songs wanted to be. And I feel like it does a really nice thing of touching on some genres while like bending them slightly, which is always my favorite thing to do. But, and then the other side of it, I think, was just, I feel like I'm always trying to outrun myself. And when I've learned to do something, when I've done something before, I struggle to do it again, So I think it was in part also this just feeling like I'd reached the end of a corridor and I needed to turn.
For sure. Right on. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like you, or I read that you wrote it on piano, which was not something you've done on previous projects.
Yeah, I played piano when I was a kid. I hadn't really thought about piano much, but switching to piano gave me that, that beginner's mind of, not being caught up in your own habits in terms of chord changes and voicings. And it also really changed how I thought about rhythm. It was a beautiful door opener for me.
Right on. So Ignorance, the subtext of it is all about climate change and climate grief. I'm curious, did you kind of grow up with that consciousness?
Yeah, I did actually. I think maybe my parents were a bit ahead of their time in that they definitely talked to me about it when I was a very small child, and it was very intense to take that in as a small kid. But I think like a lot of people, for chunks of my life, many people in my generation, for chunks of my life, I've been trying not to think about it or not thought about it or trying to set it aside, because I think it's such a strange reality to try to understand. And a lot of the way that our culture is predicated on the idea of abundance and wealth and everything in the future will be better than it is in the past, right? And the reality of the climate crisis flies in the face of all of that. So I think what I started to experience was almost that cognitive dissonance of like, I'm told to think ahead and I'm told that the future will be better, but yet I know, this dissonance of that's against the science. So for me, I think this record encapsulates the moment where I just broke that barrier in terms of understanding what it really means and taking in the reality of it in this different way than I had, which doesn't mean that I wasn't aware of climate change and I wasn't, I didn't know that it was real and it exists. But I think it is a very different thing when you actually come to understand it and realize, that a lot of what you've been taught about what your future will be and what your life will be, and what the meaning of our existence is wrong, essentially. I don't think I've encapsulated any of that in the record, but that's where I was, if you're asking.
Sure. I mean, that's a big ask that you encapsulate all that in a work. I read that one of the things that kind of triggered this motif was reading that the report on climate change. I wondered if you would talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in fall of 2018, the IPCC report on 1.5 versus 2 degrees, like the difference of what that means. That was in the news, and I had gotten in a habit of not reading the news about climate change because it's too scary to click on that link, with the dire headline. And for some reason, that fall, I just started actually reading about it, and that report obviously had a huge impact on the world. And what I find so interesting about it is it just really breaks down into numbers, which are estimates. And if you read it, they're very scientific about like, this is something we're confident of. This is something we have medium confidence. But when you break down what those numbers actually mean, it's like literally this is the story of what my life will be. This is to the year, this is the reality of where we are. And I think that was part of what made it such a intense document. And I think too, understanding like how bad 2 degrees is, for example, and realizing that that's actually like that's like in some ways the best case scenario, like understanding like, because I think when you're younger, you have a sense of like climate change is like a binary. It's like either going to happen or it's not going to happen. But actually it's a slippery slope. And actually understanding like the consequences of every rung on that ladder is a very strange experience. Yeah.
Well, I think it's amazing that you took all that and made a record that achieves such tenderness and intimacy, and like it's not a didactic meditation on any of this. It's very personal. Mm-hmm. What do you say? Let's get into some of this fantastic session you recorded.
Sure.
All right, let's do it. We're live on KEXP at home, the weather station.
I learned how to make love to the rubber, to dance with the earth, to wring from his hand the touch of a lover. I never believed in the rubber. Nobody told me nothing was mine, nothing was mine. Taken was all the most, looting at dawn, looting at dusk. Held up in the gates for the wild love. All I saw was the dust kicked up. Is love I know you were tired of seeing tears in my eyes, but are there not good reasons to cry? I swear I'm alright. Maybe you could just let it slide. I don't wanna undress this feeling. I am not poet enough to express this feeling. Was I not yet naked enough to the world? Too quick to blush. Already I'm too much in love. Is it alright? Don't wanna sing tonight. I know you're tired of seeing tears in my eyes, but everywhere we go there is an outside. Over all of the ceilings hangs a sky, and it kills me when yeah, I know it just kills me when you know it just kills me when I see someone fly high. You know it just kills me and I don't know why.
All right, we're live on KEXP at home with the weather station, talking to Tamara Lindeman from the weather station. I was floored when I first heard your song Parking Lot. I'm wondering if you would talk about the experience that sparked that song.
You know, I mean, it's one of many small experiences. I was touring a lot through 2017, 2018, and I found that I formed this funny connection to birds, in part because everywhere you go, there are birds. And you see them from the highway, you see them from the gas station, you see them when you're waiting outside the club. And I found that I could be somewhere, you know, I could be jet lagged somewhere. And if I saw a bird, sometimes I could like enter the bird's perspective. Not that I know, but just to see a city from a bird's eye is very different, and to think about how they move through space. And then thinking too about how they sing, you know, they literally sing all day. And so, yeah, when I wrote those words, I don't think I was trying to express something or I knew what I was doing. I wrote those words and they felt kind of, you know, right to me. And so I made that the song. But, you know, I think if I was to give myself more credit, I would say, you know, I was trying to express something about, you know, about the grief of entering, you know, of thinking about the non-human life and that distance and the way that it's threatened and the way that, you know, that the threat is the same. You know, it's maybe that would be the bigger interpretation. But when I wrote the song, I really was just thinking about the feeling of being burned out and looking at a bird in a parking lot. Yeah.
I feel like it's those moments where we're burned out beyond capacity, sometimes things can break through, and you get it, that bigger picture at times.
That's a very astute observation. That's very true.
And just the thought of, you're caught up in your human business of touring in a different club every night, and in that off moment and just seeing a bird doing its thing, and you're thinking about its world and how, and that moment where maybe your heart breaks, and nobody is conscious of where you're at in that moment, and that's produced some profound art.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think that moment of empathy for another being, and then empathy for yourself too, because I think something I was also wound up saying in that song is just sort of like expressing my own fragility and not not having the words for that, and I think what I was feeling was something that felt beyond feeling, and I didn't really know what to make of it yet. I didn't know what it meant, so I think I wind up expressing that too, in a very small way. Yeah.
I think it's a small way that just gestures at something larger in a way that I think when people try to make these large sweeping statements, you could have done a song that's like, think about the birds, think about what this bird is going through. And you would lose a lot of people.
Yes.
I think the lens you used on that opened it up magnificently.
Yeah, I mean, I do some teaching of songwriting a little bit with people sometimes, and it's almost always my advice is the more you can find one small moment. Songs are very small. There's not many words in a song, and what makes a song powerful is the marriage of a couple words to music and to a listener, and it's more like this. I feel like I was learning to do that. I've been learning to do that my whole life writing songs, but the more I can, when I find a small moment, that's always the best. Absolutely.
And that puts in mind so many, other songs have used great bird motifs. I think of like Sparrow by Marvin Gaye, Three Little Birds, Bob Marley.
Songbird.
Yeah, exactly. Bluebird. There's so many, you could riff all day on that.
Blackbird.
Yeah, totally. But of course, the title of it, Parking Lot, and you talking about that put me immediately in mind of Joni. I'm sure you've seen that name a lot in writings about you, and you teach songwriting. Who are some of the songwriters that like really kind of forged your craft?
I mean, I feel fairly formed by Leonard Cohen, and Bob Dylan. You can't escape them, but also why would you want to? They truly are so important, and I've learned so much from each of them in different ways. They're kind of like, they feel like, the grandfathers in a way. In that they invented, I think that, not that they invented something, because I'm sure it existed before then, but I think in a way they were the first in the public consciousness to push the boundaries of what a song could be, because I think in the past before them, people were using songwriting about love and God. I mean, those were the sort of allowed topics within popular song. And I think people were using those topics to express a lot of very deep and complex things. But, Bob Dylan just, broke that in terms of what you could put in a song. So, a lot of people that I've been really influenced by are honestly the songwriters that live in Toronto and that I know personally. People like Sandro Perry, Ryan Driver, Jennifer Castle, Steve Lamke, like, my mentors in a way are people I know who maybe aren't known to the broader world, but I think we're all sort of the grandchildren of those two. Though it's nice too. It's nice to have all the history of music before you in the way that we do in the modern world, and to find, like I recently started listening to Judy Sill, and I was like, oh, I'm the granddaughter of Judy Sill too. I didn't know. I hadn't heard her, and Bill Callahan's been a big influence on me in my life. A lot of songwriters. I mean, that's just lyrics. I could then talk about the music side, but we can call it there.
It's wonderful to, kind of be able to as you go deeper into music and listening, identify like a lineage that you fall into?
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot. I mean, this is only going to be relevant to Canadians, but there's this band called the Tragically Hip that
yeah.
Oh man,
Anytime
I
I've
grew up
been to Canada, somebody is telling me about the Hip. That's happened
somebody's
many
talking
times.
about it's because like they were just, you know, I grew up in rural Ontario, and in high school, you know, Tragically Hip was just ubiquitous. It was the music that was around me, and it's sort of like a bar rock band. But Gord Downey, the lead singer, he wrote these crazy like stream of consciousness poetry lyrics, and yet they were the most popular like arena band in Canada. And all the like hockey guys listened to them, and I listened to them too. And I've been thinking lately about how that's pushed me on a path of always thinking that lyrics were important, and always thinking that lyrics could say so much more than yeah, I love you and I'm hurt, you know, like these sort of classic themes. So yeah, Gord Downey feels like a grandfather too.
Right on.
Yeah.
I love the Hip name check. I've definitely had that conversation many times.
Yeah.
For sure. You know, of course, with COVID, everybody, including us, we've had to pivot in terms of how we come together and how we present music. And obviously, touring has disappeared. But now we're getting to the point where we're having to think about how we're going to do it in the future. Where are you at on that, especially when, you know, your impact on the environment is such a huge part of the record?
Yeah. I mean, I feel conflicted. I feel in a way sort of a beautiful blessing of like, it's strange to say I feel lucky that this came out during COVID, but there is a way in which I found it really heartening to see that recorded music could still have an impact and could still be talked about even without, you know, the flying and the driving. And I've really enjoyed feeling like it wasn't my physical self that was impacting how people saw the music. It was like my words, you know, I could just put words out in the world and people could experience those. But yeah, I mean, I would love to play shows again. I miss it. You know, I miss playing with a band. My hope for the future of touring is that we look back on 2019 as like the gilded era, you know, the era where we took it all a little too far, and we can rein it back just a little bit and be a bit more quality over quantity, respect it a bit more. You know, we had gotten to a point where every band was touring all the time, and I don't think that was good for audiences. I don't think that was good for bands, and I don't think it was good for the world. So my hope is that we can take live music more seriously and value it higher and make it more rare, in a way that sustains all the people that, of course, are sustained by it. I don't know if that's possible. You know, and of course, I hope also for electric vans and all that stuff that they're working on. But yeah, I feel like the live experience was really devalued by the quantity. And I just hope that, you know, it's always difficult as the artist to fight the battle against what the normal thing to do is. And, you know, I hope we can all take it a bit more seriously, because it does have an impact, of course.
For sure. And that's a really interesting point. I haven't heard anybody else bring up this idea of, you know, maybe, I think when everybody's thinking about going back to normal, and seeing shows again, which everybody wants to do, us having the same like constant, you know, flow, the constant presence of live music, and the thought of, you know, kind of stepping back a little bit and making it more valued and more rare. That's not a perspective I've heard a lot, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, you know, what if tickets are more expensive, but venues are more welcoming, you know, or what if, you know, yeah, we just be a bit more thoughtful about it. I'm trying to put that out in the world.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much good intention that's a part of the record, and really appreciate all you put into it. What do you say we get into the rest of the session?
Yeah, I would love to. And I'd love to just, you know, even though they're wearing masks, I'd like to hype up the
Yes.
band that played. I mean, I feel like musical skill isn't something I valued when I was younger, and I was just going for vibe over everything. But now I really do value it. And these musicians, like, you know, this is one take. This is just us playing the 5 songs in a row. And they're all like, it's like I'm in second grade and they're in like university, these people, in terms of their skill. And I've really enjoyed getting a chance to play with them and be supported by them. So, yeah, the band, if you don't mind me introducing them.
By all means, please.
Kieran Adams on the drums, Philippe Melanson and Evan Cartwright on percussion, William Kidman on guitar and keys, Christine Bougie on guitar, Johnny Spence on keys, and Ben Whiteley on bass, and Brodie West on the sax, going a little crazy on this one, which I really appreciated.
Definitely. Are these the same musicians from the record?
For the most part, yeah. For the most part, yeah. Yeah.
That must have helped form a nice unit, family.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like we were reuniting, you know. We haven't seen each other enough, and we've barely played together, so it was really fun to just get together again. Yeah.
Excellent. All right,
Yeah.
well, let's get into it. The
Cool.
Weather Station live on KEXP at home.
It was getting late. You were afraid of yourself, afraid that you might Got in the car in the cold, metallic scent of snow. Caught in my throat as I reached out to turn on the radio. The unfamiliar songs, the voices sing of love. I wanted to dance and to sing in the rhythm of the road was over where the snow piled high in all the ditches. I drove as though I did not understand all the divisions, the yellow lines and the highway signs, and the order they envisioned was so I joined the steady line of cars on the highway, as though I was going home, but I drove the wrong way, past the looming walls of subdivisions, out past the strip malls, wide fields and gas stations. I wanted just to call you there, but still I knew I couldn't. I left you back at home, 'cause I simply could not do it. Tell you I could be with you, but I could see right through it. Our whole What if I misjudged the wildest emotion? Did I take this way too far? The highway disembodied from the rest of my experience. A narrow band of ice that stretched across the disappearance of the central plan, the guiding hand, the keeping up appearance of What if I misjudged the wildest emotion? What if I
And we're live on KEXP at home with the weather station, talking to Tamara Lindeman from the weather station. Thank you so much for that fantastic session. Tell me, where did you record that?
Well, we went to the only recording studio in Toronto that could hold us all with our COVID capacity regulations. It's a very fancy, intimidating studio that I've always been way too afraid to go to. It's called Revolution Recording. in Toronto.
Awesome. With the themes of the record, I know you've done some real life activism. I know you've done some stuff with I think a Greta Thunberg initiative that happened. Is that right?
No, I mean, I've just been like a normal, day-to-day person. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's any organizations or any resources you would want to point people towards in terms of climate consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many. It's hard to, I think like in terms of climate consciousness, I just think it's important. I feel like a lot of people, when they first start paying attention, the first thing they want to do is just deal with the anxiety of it. And so a lot of people sort of find an ideology that takes away the anxiety. Like, you know, a lot of people become obsessed with various solutions. And the problem with climate change is that it affects everything, and everything is the solution. It's a very deep, complex problem. And so, yeah, I hope that if you're getting into reading about it, you know, make sure to read from many sources and be thoughtful of the news you take in, because there's a lot of bad information. And there's so many great people, though, doing good work. And yeah, good luck, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there.
Yeah.
There's a huge, Indigenous activism movement in Canada in particular that's been going strong, especially in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of information out there about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, you touched on something really, really important. I'm curious with all the themes and all the research into this, has it left you with any kind of hopelessness, anxiety? How are you dealing with that? Because it didn't feel like this was a cynical or dejected record at all. It felt hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hopeful when it comes to the math, you know? Like, the math is better than it was 2 years ago, which is great. There's been a lot of shift and a lot of change, but the math, even at its best, is still fairly frightening. But I do feel hopeful in terms of, for all of the pain that COVID has caused, I think it has reminded, our wealthy Western world of our own fragility, which I think was the missing piece, for people to understand that, this will happen. This will affect us. I think we were the people around the world actually have greater climate consciousness than many of us in these wealthy Western countries have, because it's affecting them. So I do have a certain amount of, not hope, but a certain amount of belief that we might turn a corner fast enough, because our values have started to change as a society, I think, which is cool. And I think that the way I feel about climate now is that maybe I moved through the anxiety part or the grief part, and now I'm into a part where engaging with it just feels like engaging with the most important things in my life. Like this, this is the most important thing. This is what matters the most. And so engaging with climate information or climate activism is just putting myself in touch with what matters. And so I think there's a light at the end of the climate grief tunnel in that way. Even though, as I say, the math is still pretty difficult. Yeah. But it's another good reason to move past, the utopian thinking that I think we've lived in far too long as a society. Because I think if you understand, like, things are going to be broken and fragmented in our lives, things are going to be difficult. And how do we, actually, like, we can retain our humanity through that, that's something we can hold on to in the way that we have in certain ways through this time.
And that's important to hear. Thank you for that. And thank you, Tamara. Thank you, and all the wonderful musicians for that great session and for joining us on KEXP.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Cool.
All right. We're live on
Thanks for letting me
KEXP at home. Absolutely. Anytime. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in this live room in the future.
Me too. Me too.
Well, this has been live on KEXP at home with the Weather Station. My name is Larry Mizell Jr. Thank you.
Discover new music at listener-powered KEXP.org.